Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching. This is something to think about on the American Doofus channel. And this is definitely something to think about. We know that our government doesn't tell us everything. We know that secrets have been kept and are being kept. We know that sometimes history has been whitewashed. And we're going to look at that tonight. I'm going to give a couple of minutes here. Let people get into that want to join live. And hello, everybody. Thank you all for watching. If you're watching, as most people do, if you're watching the taped version, so to speak, the replay, if you will. Thank you for watching and leave a comment. If you're watching live, feel free to join in the chat. I'm going to be in the chat. I'm going to be showing a lot tonight and not talking as much as normal. So I want to get into something here real quick before we start. As I said, give a couple of minutes here and let some people get in if they so desire. And I just want to go back to something I talked about. I talked about this last night, and 5 hours ago it came up. This is the first time I've seen it anywhere close to mainstream, and this is The Watchman. It's not mainstream, but it does talk about what we talked about last night, that Israel has been simulating attacks against Hezbollah deep within Lebanon, as well as within Israel's own borders, and then Gaza and the West Bank, as well as the air attack simulation we talked about last night. That wasn't brought up here. I imagine we'll hear about that in a day or two. In a similar channel. You're not going to see it on CNN or hear about it on any of the major mainstream, because they don't want your focus there. Having crude nuclear missiles is the other, on the verge of having crude nuclear device. And so those are two things we talked about last night. I just wanted to bring up, just to show you that, we are kind of ahead of the curve most of the time on here. And when we get information that is legitimate, and we feel truthful, then we pass it along. So got some folks in here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching. Without further ado, let's get to what we're all here for. Last Saturday or Sunday I think, I don't remember, at some point last week, I mentioned that there were
Hello,
people,
everyone. Welcome to my channel.
There were people that we always assumed were white, that maybe weren't in our history. And I was doing some research. I was going to put an episode together, and I found out that there's a site that has been doing this. So we're just going to kind of watch along together. And as I said, I'm going to be in the chat. And let me make sure I got our volume up all the way. Okay. And let's just we're not going to, this is a 2-hour long video, and we're not going to watch the whole thing. We're going to watch the introduction of the video, where he kind of explains some things, and then we're going to watch just one short segment, relatively short segment.
If you have viewed some of my previous videos, welcome back. This video should really raise an eyebrow. It did for me when I was conducting the research. Okay, so this video, as you can see, is titled Prominent Americans You Assumed Were White. How many times when recording or listening to someone speak about history do we assume that that person that they are speaking about is white, just based on their title or position? Oftentimes we, including myself in the past tense, usually assume that the individual is white. This is not a coincidence. In my opinion, this is due to the fact that we as Americans have been conditioned to believe only white people, for the most part, have accomplished anything of importance. How often do we pay attention to historical figures' appearance? I know that while doing research for my videos, there were many books, articles, and newspapers that totally skipped over what the person looked like. In my opinion, this means you don't get a complete description of the person. Another factor, and this is a glaring issue, does the painting, photo, or etching even resemble the written description? Now, I've also come across many books, articles, and newspapers that do have a physical description of the person, but for some reason, these pieces of literature don't make it onto the high school or college course reading list. Although, on the occasions when they do appear on the reading list, and the subject has a shallow or light, tawny, brown, olive, dark, swarthy complexion, the darker complexion gets explained away as the person only having dark hair or eye color or both, which of course totally negates the meaning and definition of complexion. This false definition of complexion has been acceptable by academia for a very long time. However, now that the internet is available to the masses, it allows one to search thousands of keywords in seconds. You should soon come to realize, or at least some people realize, that there is something majorly wrong with how history has been portrayed. Again, as I always do in my videos, I will give you the definition of the word complexion. There are three basic categories when most people are described in history: complexion, hair color, and eye color. Although in modern times we can change our complexion. Take Michael Jackson, for example. He kept the same hair color, however, he has had various complexions. He went from a dark complexion to a pale complexion. He is a perfect example of the extreme differences in complexions. He went from black to white. This is my theory. After conducting years of research, Black Europeans of the colonial era and after did not consider themselves Negroes, or what you and I would consider the typical black person today. There were several reasons for this, and I don't want to delve into it too heavily. I can do that in another video. But briefly, Black Europeans obviously were of a different culture. They spoke European languages, they had distinct accents, the elites considered themselves educated and intellectual. Some also had slight variations in eye color and hair texture, and this was due to hundreds of years of isolation and in many cases mixtures of people. Although, after looking at evidence of Black European sculptures, books, journals, etchings, jewelry, and religious paintings, etc., it's clear that many Black Europeans resemble the typical African American we see walking around today, with all their variations in complexions, eye color, and hair texture. As far as the term Negro and who the Europeans called Negro, they were referring to the Aboriginal people of America, the AKA Indians. Okay, I can hear people now. Oh, sure. Now the American Indians were black people too. This is exactly what I'm saying. There's a huge amount of evidence for this assertion, but I am not going to cover that now. There are researchers who have hours and hours of research backing up this theory. I will do a video on that topic and link all the researchers to that video. Due to the obvious white supremacist tilt on what is provided to the public via our educational system, especially since the Woodrow Wilson administration, pointing out complexion is one of the only ways that the reader can determine the ethnicity of the subject, or in modern terms, is the person black or white. I mentioned Woodrow Wilson because it was during his administration that much of the common historical knowledge was omitted, destroyed, and rewritten to be replaced by Woodrow Wilson's historical point of view, which was based on the lost cause narrative. The lost cause narratives typically portray the Confederacy as a noble, just, and heroic group. So with Wilson's presidential power and academic influence, and also having been the former president of Princeton University, The majority of the nation stopped using the common history books of that era and started using the historical books literally written by Woodrow Wilson. A 10-volume set of history books that, in my estimation, changed a nation. And just as a side note, the Board of Trustees of Princeton University on June 22, 2020, released a statement that read, Board of Trustees concludes that Wilson's racist views and policies make him an inappropriate namesake for the School of Public and International Affairs and Residential College. The current president, Christopher Eisgruber, I may have pronounced that wrong, in a statement when explaining why the board made its decision said, Wilson's racism was significant and consequential, even by the standards of his own time. He segregated the federal civil service after it had been racially integrated for decades, thereby taking America backward in its pursuit of justice. He not only acquiesced in, but added to the persistent practice of racism in this country, a practice that continues to do harm today. He went on further to say, and I am paraphrasing, Princeton is part of an America that has too often disregarded, ignored, or excused racism, allowing the persistence of systems that discriminate against Black people. And yet another leading cause of misinformation regarding European and American history was due to the direct and indirect influence of the Daughters of the Confederacy. A great video to watch regarding the impact they had on American history was created by Vox, V-O-X, on YouTube, and it's titled How Southern Socialites Rewrote Civil War History. Okay, so now let me show you more evidence as to why I believe that there were thousands of Black books, articles, and newspapers that do have a physical description.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to pause it and hit the wrong button. There we go. There we go. I wanted to pause it for a second, hop over here into the chat and say hello to everybody. Thank you all for watching. This is something to think about. Now, this isn't, this stays in line with everything that I've pretty much said throughout the course of the history of this show, including just last week talking about Woodrow Wilson and the impact his racism had and still has on our country, and how we're doing the exact same thing right now by trying to remove any talk of anything other than straight white Christian in our country. And while I am a straight white Christian, I also understand that there's a vast plethora of diversity within our country, and that's what our country was, in my opinion, always supposed to be. And that's what I believe the majority of our country wants this country to be. So with that being said, I'm going to get back to it in just a second. I want to say hi to Sissy, Parias, Linda, Glinda, Pat Tolliver, how are you? Thank you all for watching. Again, if you're watching live, don't feel free to hop in the chat. If you have questions, put them down there and we'll read them, and I'll answer them best as I can. And with that being said, let me get back over here and we will restart this.
From Europe. Okay, so now let me show you more evidence as to why I believe that there were thousands of Black Europeans that immigrated to America from Europe. All right, so I'm going to start off with the great Daniel Webster. And so for many of you, you're wondering, who the heck is Daniel Webster? Well, Daniel Webster was born in Salisbury, New Hampshire, January 18th, 1782. His parents were Ebenezer Webster and Abigail Webster. Ebenezer was a tavern owner, farmer, politician, and finally a judge. The Websters were of English and Scottish extraction. In Daniel's early life, he was educated at the Phillips Exeter Academy, and then he went on to Dartmouth College. Daniel was a lawyer and a statesman who represented New Hampshire and Massachusetts in the U.S. Congress. He also served as Secretary of State under Presidents Harrison, Tyler, and Fillmore. He argued over 200 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and was a member of the Federalist Party and the National Republican Party, and then the Whig Party. Okay, so my first piece of evidence is from the 53rd Congress, 3rd Session, Senate document, Proceedings in Congress upon the Acceptance of the Statutes of John Stark and Daniel Webster, presented by the state of New Hampshire in 1895. As you can see on page 84, I quote, Captain Ebenezer Webster, father of the godlike Daniel, the great Constitution expounder, whose statue stands alongside that of Stark in yonder hall, and whose name is writ with his high on the scroll of fame. How little these men could have thought that this sublime portion awaiting them when Daniel, a young lawyer at Portsmouth, on his way to the courts in Concord, and Stark, living in the retirement of his farm, met at the old hotel in Hooksett, and the hero of Bennington spoke from the sale of himself at one time for 40 pounds, and was ready to believe Daniel was the son of Captain Webster because of the same deep, swarthy color of his face, only blacker. Again, pay attention. Not only is he saying Daniel's father was the same deep, swarthy complexion, he says Daniel's face is even blacker. He doesn't mention his hair or eye color. He specifically mentions his face. Again,
Okay, just wanted to play a little bit of that just so you get an idea of what's been going on possibly with our history. And the question now becomes, two questions actually. Has anyone ever heard of Hannibal Hamlin? Hannibal Hamlin was the first black vice president of the United States. The first black president of the United States, possibly Abraham Lincoln.
all right, so let's move on to a big one. Abraham Lincoln. Yes, I said Abraham Lincoln. I don't think I have to introduce this man because if you were educated in the United States,
Let me pop into the chat before I start this back over again. Never heard of him. Most people haven't. He wasn't in our history books. He was the vice president that was replaced by Andrew Jackson. He was Abraham Lincoln's vice president during his for Andrew Johnson, I'm sorry. He was the vice president under Lincoln during Lincoln's first term. And they decided to replace him and go with someone that would draw more Southern vote during Lincoln's second election because the Civil War. But if you look him up, and again, it's not talked about a lot because Woodrow Wilson rewrote all of our history. Again, thank you everybody that's watching. Stick around here. This is, again, we're not going to do the entire video, but I would recommend watching it. I've got to go back. Sorry.
you were taught just about everything about him, except for the fact that he had a self-prescribed dark complexion. Now, isn't it funny that his complexion never gets any attention? Okay, so I'm going to give you the bare minimum on Mr. Lincoln, and then I'll move on to the evidence I have for him. All right, so Abraham Lincoln was born February 12, 1809, and he died April 15, 1865. He was an American statesman and lawyer who served as the 16th President of the United States from 1861 to 1865. Lincoln led the nation through its greatest moral, constitutional, and political crisis, the American Civil War. He succeeded in preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, bolstering the federal government, and modernizing the U.S. economy. Lincoln was born into poverty in a log cabin and was raised on the frontier primarily in Indiana. He was self-educated and became a lawyer, Whig Party leader, Illinois state legislator, and U.S. congressman for Illinois. In 1849, he returned to his law practice, but became very vexed by the opening of additional lands to slavery as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He re-entered politics in 1854, becoming a leader in the new Republican Party, and he reached a national audience in the 1858 debates against Stephen Douglas. Lincoln ran for president in 1860, sweeping the North in victory. Pro-slavery elements in the South equated his success with the North's rejection of their right to practice slavery, and the Southern states began seceding from the Union. To secure its independence, the new Confederate states fired on Fort Sumter, a U.S. fort in the South, and Lincoln called upon forces to suppress the rebellion and restore the Union. All right, so that whole description was from wikipedia.com. All right, so that was just a little bit about our 16th president of the United States. Let's look at some of the evidence that shows he was a black man. All right, so from the U.S. National Park Service website, we can read that Lincoln wrote 3 autobiographies. In his second autobiography, dated December 20th, 1859, he described himself saying, quote, "If any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said, I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly, lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion with coarse black hair and gray eyes. No other marks or brands recollected." All right, so the giveaways in his own description are dark complexion and coarse black hair. Now remember, as I explained and showed you via the 1895 South Carolina Convention discussions, Abraham Lincoln, having the appearance of a black man, was considered white because he could trace his lineage back to Europe. Now again, this is my theory, but that is why I'm explaining to you how I came to this conclusion. Okay, so my next source is from the U.S. Congressional Record, dated February 12th, 1927, located on pages 3610 and 3611. These pages contain the same Lincoln autobiographical quote from Lincoln's own book, as you can see on the screen, where he states that he has a dark complexion. I'm showing you this reference because I want you to realize that everyone in Congress knew that he had a dark complexion, and no one disputed it. In fact, I'm going to go further. There were quite a few congressional members that had dark complexions. However, as I mentioned, the term white man or male was a status. So someone referring to this statesman today as a white man and not knowing this information that I shared with you today would jump to the wrong conclusion. Okay, so on to my next piece of evidence, and this is from history.net, and it's titled Lincoln the Homely, written by Harold Holzer. Holzer has a quote on page 7 that states, Nathaniel Hawthorne firsthand in 1862, quote, "His hair was black, still unmixed with gray, stiff, somewhat bushy, and had apparently been acquainted with neither brush nor comb. His complexion is dark and shallow, betokening, I fear, an insalubrious atmosphere around the White House. He has thick black eyebrows and an impending brow. His nose is large, and the lines about his mouth are strongly defined." Just as a side note, I'm sure you're wondering what insalubrious means, and I did, so I looked it up, and according to Google's dictionary online, it means like unpleasant or unsavory. So I guess they're saying that the atmosphere around the White House at that time was unpleasant. Okay, so going back to the description I just read from Nathaniel Hawthorne, who was actually an eyewitness, stating that Lincoln had a dark and shallow complexion. And shallow, according to Webster's 1828 dictionary, means having a yellowish color, of a pale sickly color, tinged with a dark yellow, as in a shallow skin. Hawthorne also mentions that Lincoln's hair is stiff and somewhat bushy, along with a large nose. All right, so then Holzer also writes that Journalists vented endlessly about whether he was, in fact, too ugly to serve as president, castigating him as a lank-sided Yankee of the unloveliest and of the dirtiest complexion. The Charleston Mercury assailed him as a horrid-looking wretch, sooty and scoundrelly in aspect, a cross between the nutmeg dealer, the horse swapper, and the nightman, a creature fit evidently for petty treasons, small stratagems, and all sorts of spoils. Holzer further writes, "It is fair to say that no one has ever before or since looked quite like Abraham Lincoln. Certainly not his own children, who resemble their mother's family, not their father's. We have no pictures of Lincoln's own mother, who is said to be large-boned, tough-skinned like her son, but who died long before photography became commonplace. The future president's father supposedly sat for a lone photograph late in his life, but historians remain uncertain that it really shows Thomas Lincoln. It was as if the face sprang uniquely from the Kentucky soil, from the Indiana prairie, and from what Nathaniel Hawthorne called the village experience. You know, in my opinion, it's interesting that there are no paintings or etchings of the president's own mother. Or are they just not being shown to us? If Abraham Lincoln resembled his mother, then I'm assuming she also had a dark complexion and maybe some typical black facial features. Also, I'm not sure what Hawthorne meant by the village experience. All right, so another piece of evidence comes from a book called A Self-Made Man, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1849, by Sidney Blumenthal. In the book, the author reveals that Lincoln admitted that he had been an indentured servant, a slave, rented out by his father to neighbors in rural Indiana. The author has a quote from Herndon that states, "If he was angry with his father, he also knew that his father had been reduced to a dirt farmer and compelled to flee Kentucky to escape from slavery. Slave states are places for poor white people to remove from, not to remove to," Lincoln said in 1854 in his opposition to Douglas's Nebraska Act. I want you to again remember that just because he considered himself a white man, that is not what his description revealed. This book also mentions Lincoln's self-prescribed description of himself, although this author points out that at the end of Lincoln's description, he uses the words, "no other marks or brands recollected." This is the same terminology used by slave masters that had newspaper ads looking for their slaves. In my opinion, Lincoln was acknowledging his former status as a fugitive and his understanding of the evils of slavery. All right, so my next piece of evidence regarding President Lincoln is from the book Life of Lincoln, written by Clifton M. Nichols, published in 1896, and we're going to page 12 and 13. As you can see at the bottom of page 12, the author is writing about Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father. It goes on to read, "A most remarkable and almost inexplicable fact is that to Thomas Lincoln was reserved the honor of an illustrious paternity. Thomas was about 5 feet 10 inches in height, weighed about 200 pounds, had dark brown eyes, dark skin, and black hair." Okay, so no ambiguous terms there. The author directly writes that Thomas Lincoln had dark skin. Obviously, this makes sense because Abe had dark skin, and naturally, you obtain your complexion from one or both of your parents. Okay, so my last piece of evidence for President Lincoln is from the book called The Lincoln Encyclopedia, The Spoken and Written Words of Abraham Lincoln. All right, I'm going to reiterate, these are Abraham Lincoln's own words, and they were compiled and edited by Archer H. Shaw, with introduction by David C. Mearns, Assistant Librarian, Library of Congress, 1950. And we're going to go to page 190, and it says, "Lincoln, Abraham, personal description of." And the quote says, "Perhaps you have forgotten me. Don't you remember a long black fellow who rode on horseback with you from Tremont to Springfield nearly 10 years ago, swimming our horses over the Mackinac on the trip? Well, I am the same old fellow yet. To Joseph Hewitt, February 13th, 1848. All right, so you can see in his own quote, he calls himself a long black fellow who rode on horseback. Okay, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, okay? A long black fellow? Hello, that's screaming black guy, at least where I'm from. I'm going to give you a for instance here. Pretend someone just flags down the police and says, hey, someone just stole something from me. And the police say, well, what did he look like? Well, he looked like a long black fellow. He was riding on horseback. Guess what, folks? They're not going to be looking for a white guy. All right, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to share all the prime sources of evidence I have for Abraham Lincoln because I wouldn't be able to get to anyone else. However, I do want to give you a link to an outstanding researcher named Karamiu Awa. He has an extremely informative YouTube channel. I love his research because he backs everything up with sources, so you can check them out for yourself. Anyway, he did a great video on Abraham Lincoln called The Truth About Abraham Lincoln, Runaway Indentured Servant, Colored Man. I highly recommend it. I will leave a link to it in the information section of this video.
So there we go. Again, just giving us something to think about. So what do you think? I personally think it's a very distinct possibility. I mean, if you start, we like to connect the dots on here. We have a show that we do episodes of called Connect the Dots, where we connect the dots. And if you connect the dots, he has identified himself as a slave in his own words. He's called himself a long black man in his own words. And in that time period, it was basically, a white man or a slave. There wasn't a whole lot of in between. And since he could trace his heritage back to Europe, then he was considered a white man. Whereas the black man either came from Africa or from native to the land. So we haven't progressed a whole lot as a society, in my opinion. Not near as much as we should have or could have. But that doesn't mean we still can't. And that's why I did this show and do some of the shows like we do, to give us something to think about. So anybody in the chat, anybody got anything to say? Any comments, any questions or anything? It's a distinct possibility that Abraham Lincoln was descended from melanated descendants. We'll put it that way. All right. As well as also in that episode, Edgar Allan Poe, someone that we probably all thought always presented, Vincent Price played him in all the movies I ever saw. We assumed he was white. J. Edgar Hoover, the leader of the head of the FBI that infiltrated and destroyed the Black Panthers and probably eventually he probably provided the information that led to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Was himself of melanated ancestry. These are things that we don't get taught. How much other stuff do we not get taught? How much other stuff do we not know? How many secrets does our government keep from us? And those that are, when I first heard this, I was like, there are too many pictures of Abraham Lincoln. Well, there really aren't all that many pictures of Abraham Lincoln. And plus, when Woodrow Wilson was in charge of the White House and the government. He was also in charge of the Library of Congress and the National Archives and the photographs. And, so maybe the photos were doctored. I wouldn't put it past in order to try to whitewash history. What are you going to say? That's our government. Blacks in quote, blacks in Europe that came to the Americas, they were not slaves, end quote. That's a lie. Just do a little bit of research, and I understand why you're saying that on the surface. I do, but there were a lot of blacks in Europe, and I mean, it's in it. They're not as whitewashed in their history. So sometimes you have to look at sources. All the time, I look at sources outside of America. Okay, I get a lot of news from sources outside of America because, well, I don't trust our mainstream media news. They're trying to control what we think, in my opinion, instead of just giving us things to think about. But I respect the fact that you don't agree with that, and perfectly right to do so. What is the link? His link in that episode? Let me get that for you here real quick. The guy, the channel is Straight Up, STRAIGHT, space, capital U, capital P. And he's got episodes about the Black European heritage. So yeah, you can check that out. That there were possibly black first ladies. So there's a lot of dust that has been swept under carpets as far as American history, and trying to shape the thoughts, beliefs, and spirituality of our country in ways that have all been incredibly perverse, in my opinion. America's foundation is built on injustice. I would say that. My brother Apollo, peace. Do you have any African black DNA? I'm not certain. My dad's dad, my grandpa on my dad's side, was an orphan, and the orphanage that he grew up in burnt down. It was in Hamilton, Ohio, and there aren't any records of. I can't go back any farther, and I don't know a lot about my dad's dad. That being said, I have done the Ancestry DNA test. I did it about, I don't know, probably 5 years ago now, and it keeps advancing, and it keeps it keeps giving me matches. And I have had a match with the same last name, a distant cousin that was obviously melanated. So I honestly, that's as far as I know, and I haven't dug on it as much because I've spent a lot of time researching other things here. Yes, Linda, you're right. There were a lot of mixed race people, and some passed for white, and yeah. And I was doing the connect the dots thing about Abraham Lincoln possibly being black, and I only did one dot. Let me connect those real quick, just for something to think about here. he seems to self-identify, as well as the descriptions. Nathaniel Hawthorne was a very accomplished author and a writer. So, as a writer, I'm assuming that he was very observant and detail oriented when it came to his writing. And when he describes Abraham Lincoln, he describes him as a melanated person, in my opinion. Then you go to Lincoln actually freed the slaves, and and his own party, the people, nobody wanted him to do that. He had a deep need for justice to do that. And you have to be able to have an open mind and at least speculate. Could he have a very personal reason as well for doing that? Something to think about. Fabrication at Fabrication Unlimited one. Okay. Jay, that's what we're told in our history books. That's what history tells us, that he did it for the Union, not because he felt sorry for the slaves. Our history books tell us that it was all about trying to preserve the nation. But I don't know. I'm open-minded enough to at least consider that there's a possibility that he might have had some melanated genes, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's the thing. That's the thing, that the people that really have a problem are the incredibly insecure, hate-filled white people that practice supremacy, that practice that believe they're going to get raptured simply because they know the name of Jesus, without realizing nobody's going to get into heaven with hate in their heart. Nobody. It doesn't matter what faith you perceive to be in. You're not going to get into heaven with hate in your heart, in my opinion. And that comes from studying the Bible. So anyway, John Hanson was the first leader before George Washington. Yes, that's actually true. He was the first, I believe it was the first president of the Continental Congress, or the first president of the Senate. I don't remember what the exact terms were, but he was the leader of the country, technically, before George Washington. American Doofus channel. Wait until white people find out that Jesus was black also. Yeah, I've said that. I've said that a few times on here. Zax, I've said that a few times on here, that white supremacists that believe they're Christian are going to be shocked when they realize that Jesus was a Jewish man from the Middle East, and a lot darker than what they're envisioning, because most people don't even think about what Jesus would actually look like. They just think, the pictures that Europeans painted, and the movies that actors have portrayed, and not really just sitting down and kind of thinking about, well, wait a minute, 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, there weren't there weren't a lot of people that looked like white heavy metal rock and roll stars, and that's kind of the portrayal Jesus has always had, is that he's a white European, and yeah, there's going to be some surprise. So thank you all for watching. Thank you those watching live. Thank you those in the chat. Hit that like button, please. It'll get the video out to a few more people. And most of my videos are suppressed because I talk about things that, I talk about WARS and I talk about GUNS. And the next episode we're going to have a talk about GUNS. And specifically GUNS in USA, and try to have a realistic conversation. And I'm going to have people come on. I'm going to put the link. I'm going to do the software, and so you'll be able to pop on for a couple of minutes if you want, and give your opinion. So we're going to do that on the next episode. That'll either be Saturday or Sunday. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll know when we're on. I'll put a post up on YouTube and try to remember. For some reason, I'm not broadcasting on Facebook at the moment. So, but I will I'll put posts up to let you know if it's going to be Saturday or Sunday. So thank you all. Love you all. Apollo, I want to get you on here, man. If you're still in here, I want to get you on here. We haven't talked in a while, and it's time we talk. Prius, everybody, thank you. Namaste, shalom, salam, blessings upon all of those that want them, in the name of the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. God bless you all. I love you all. We'll see you next time. This has been something to think about on the American Doofus channel.